Welcome to all of the folks here tonight to the Salon Series put on by the League of Women Voters of San Luis Obispo County. Our Salon Series is where we present information on timely topics. And we're so glad you could join us this evening for this very interesting, you didn't know it was so important, special districts. You'll notice the forum is being taped this evening thanks to AGP Video and Nancy Castle and her crew, Drew, who have been setting this up for us. The tape will be available on SlowSpan. It will also be rebroadcast on Channel 21 and posted on the League of Women Voters website. And so you can see it and invite other folks to watch it. If anyone would like to help defray the cost of taping this, we are glad to accept your donation this evening. We have a sign-in sheet. So far, everyone has signed in. Thank you very much. We have a literature table you'll notice over here with a trifold with information about the League. Also, how to join the League. There's an application. The simple things of restrooms are that way, water and Girl Scout cookies that way. Without further ado, Neil Havlik, would you please introduce our panel this evening?
Thank you, Marilee. The idea that we had for this forum was to educate people about special districts. I've worked in my own career for special districts on a number of occasions, and so I kind of know what they are, but a lot of people don't, and they don't know the breadth, the diversity, and the variations in size, scope, and power that these organizations had. So we thought that might be something that people would enjoy learning about. And to help us do that tonight, we have with us David Church, who is the Executive Officer of the San Luis Obispo County Local Agency Formation Commission, or LAFCO, which is another entity that many people don't know of, and it is a very powerful organization that does a lot of things that sort of go below the radar for many people. And also Mr. Mike LeBrun. Mike is the General Manager of the Napomo Community Services District. And I'll give you a little more introduction on him in a moment. I'm retired, but I serve on the board of another special district called the Coastal San Luis Resource Conservation District, which is another small entity you probably never heard of. So we wanted to tell you about these things. So I would ask Dave will start. I want to tell you just a little bit about Dave. He's a graduate of Westmont College in Santa Barbara. He also earned a master's degree in, was regional planning?
No, administration.
Oh, in administration at the University of San Francisco, and he's been in San Luis Obispo for quite a number of years, working at the county, and then he worked for the Local Agency Formation Commission on the staff, and then in about 5 years ago, 2009, 2010, became the executive officer of that organization, and he's been the boss there ever since. So, without further ado, I'll ask Dave to take over, and he'll tell you a little bit about the LAFCO and its relationship to all of these districts. Dave.
Thanks, Neil. Thank you very much.
Don't stand right in front of the projector. Get out of the light.
Don't go towards the light. That's like a bug. Okay. Yeah. I won't go towards the light. Thanks for bringing the Girl Scout cookies. I have a love-hate relationship with Girl Scout cookies at this point in time, so I'm struggling.
You got girls in your family that are selling?
No, we don't, but we usually have girls who live down the street who are selling. In fact, don't we have some coming?
Not so far.
That's my wife, by the way.
Those boxes are for sale.
All right. Well, thanks for having me tonight, and we are going to talk about special districts. It's kind of an interesting area of government that people don't really know about, and I think you probably wouldn't know that you have about 45 special districts in San Luis Obispo County, all alone here. So you've got special districts that range in all different types of functions. And just a little bit about LAFCOs, though, before we get started. And how many people have heard of LAFCO? Oh, wow, I'm going to skip this slide. Nice. We were established in 1963. Every county has a LAFCO. They were created to make sense of growth in services that were proceeding unchecked throughout the state. Really the post-World War II boom that was happening. And there was all kinds of growth and development. And Governor Pat Brown at the time put together a Blue Ribbon Committee that came up with the ideas of having a commission in every single county that would deal with boundary issues. And essentially we are the Boundary Change Commission. We change boundaries of different jurisdictions. At the time, special districts and cities were fighting over which jurisdiction would serve certain areas. Sometimes they would fight over which jurisdictions would not serve certain areas, depending upon, a lot of times, the property tax that was going to be coming in or the amount of money that might be coming in from a particular community. LAFCOs were set up to help deal with this situation. In 2000, new legislation was expanded actually to confirm LAFCO's role in figuring out these questions. And essentially we are giving broader authority over sphere of influence updates, and that's a long-range planning boundary that we prepare, and what's called a municipal service review, which helps back up the sphere of influence. So that gives us the information about a jurisdiction, and you can find all of those are online about each one of these jurisdictions. Right now our composition, you have Roberta Fonzie, she's a city council member from the city of Atascadero, Ed Waggy from Pismo Beach, Jamie Irons is our alternate from the city of Morro Bay, and then we have 2 county board of supervisor members, and that's Bruce Gibson, Frank Meacham, and Adam Hill as the alternate. 2 special district members, we have Merle Clift from Cambria CSD, Marshall Hilsky from Los Osos CSD, Robert Enns, he's from the Cayucas Sanitary District. And then we have 1 public member, and right now that's Tom Murray, he's our current chair, and we have David Brooks, who's an alternate public member. And we have alternates who can serve in place of the regular member if the occasion calls for it, if the regular member can't make it. That's our composition right now. One thing about the composition in LAFCO, they were set up so that they would have city, county, and special districts members if the special districts chose to be on LAFCO. And in our county, the special district said that would be a good idea to have representation on LAFCO, particularly since they have to have annexations, spheres of influence, all of those things that LAFCO is responsible for. They wanted to have some input into that. So we have, in our county, these 7 folks are making really boundary decisions and formation decisions, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So what are the actions we're responsible for? Incorporations. Napomo and Cambria actually looked at the possibility of an incorporation. Typically incorporations right now in the state of California financially are incredibly difficult to do. And that's largely because revenues are very, very hard to raise, and to get enough revenues to be a city is a real challenge. And it usually has to do with the sales tax base and your transient occupancy tax base. Those 2 pieces of the puzzle have to be pretty strong to be able to become a city at this point. District formations, Ground Squirrel Hollow, I love saying that name, is one that was recently, the most recent one that was approved. And I think that was in 2003. And then in 2004, the Cayucas Community Services District was voted down. In fact, it was voted down 80% to 20. It was not only no, it was H no. All right, I'll let you guys say that because we're on tape right now. So yeah. The other district formation you're going to probably keep an eye on from us is going to be the water district formation up in the Paso Robles area. And that is something that we've been following, we've been tracking, we've been laying out public information pieces about how that process will work. So we have been working on that one as well. Dissolutions happened through LAFCO. Los Osos CSD was proposed for dissolution at one point in time. LAFCO denied that proposal. And they denied it because Los Osos CSD had incurred a lot of debt, and that debt would have then transferred to the county and all of us as taxpayers. So that debt didn't get transferred. LAFCO decided Los Osos should work its way out through the problems. And in fact, they have gotten out of debt, they have actually gotten out of bankruptcy, and so they have taken a long time, but they've moved their organization along. Annexations are done on a fairly regular basis. We can talk more about those as we go, but that's a attachment or an annexation to a particular jurisdiction. Detachments are rare. They don't happen very often. That's where you actually de-annex a piece of property from a jurisdiction. Outside user agreements are to serve a property that's outside the service area of a jurisdiction, but almost always inside the sphere of influence. Not always, but almost always. We update spheres of influence, which is a long-range planning boundary that indicates what areas of a jurisdiction are going to be annexed in the future. And the municipal service review shows us the capacities of those jurisdictions. We also activate latent powers. And Ground Squirrel Hollow, again our favorite name, they recently activated their solid waste power, so they can now provide solid waste or garbage services to the jurisdiction, to the community of Ground Squirrel Hollow. In the state of California, 3,300 special districts. And you name it, they might do it, from A to Z. I mean, they go all the way from airports to zoos to mosquitoes. Special districts can do all kinds of things. Principal Act and Special Act districts. The Principal Act districts are formed under a piece of state law that's already embedded in the government codes. And there's various code sections that identify the principal acts of a district. For community services district, like what Mike runs, they have a particular piece of the state law under which that district is formed and under which that district operates. Special Act districts have been actually approved by the state legislature. And they were approved with certain powers, certain authorities, and they're also given special procedures and policies that they have to follow as well. But they've been considered by the state legislature and on a special act basis. Sometimes you'll see a groundwater management district that gets formed like this. And that's happened before. They're celebrated as the best in local democracy, meaning they're right on the ground, they're in a community like Napomo, like Oceano, like Templeton, and their people, the representatives come from that community, and they really are celebrated as this best ideal for local democracy. But they're also used as an example in California of fragmented and overlapping government. So there's sometimes examples where you have these layers of districts that can actually be involved. In San Diego, for example, they've had to kind of unravel their fire districts and get them to consolidate more because they all had overlapping layers, and it was very, very challenging. So they've done some special studies down there. In San Luis County, I think thankfully, we don't have a lot of that overlapping type of problem. And so our special districts, I don't think, have that kind of issue. Special districts play a vital role in providing services. There is no doubt. And as we go through this, I think you'll see they do a whole variety of things. And you'll hear from Mike and Neil about all the things that they do as well. There are what's called independent special districts, and they're governed by the principal acts of the California government code. And you can see there are locally elected board of directors as well, and that's important because that's what an independent special district, a CSD is an independent, a community services district, is an independent special district. A dependent special district is governed by state law, but their governing board is the County Board of Supervisors. And a CSA, I live in Santa Margarita. So a county service area, I live in county service area number 23. I should say we live in county service area number 23. And they provide us with water, drainage, and lighting. And so that's a dependent special district, and the board actually oversees those. So they range in small size. Creston Hills Ranch CSD, which only does roads, has like 19 property owners in it. I would never, by the way, I would never suggest that you form a CSD to do your roads in that manner. I would think that people should come together and figure out how to do their roads, because the CSD, as Mike's going to talk about, is a big government structure that does a lot of different things, or can. And you're subject to a lot of different laws, too, if you're a CSD. Districts are a vital part of providing services to the community. So we have 15 community services districts in San Luis Obispo County. 11 of the CSDs provide multiple services, and now we added, actually in that 11 is Ground Squirrel Hollow. They have roads power, and they also have the authority to collect solid waste. And those are active powers. The state law has a whole listing of powers, like 20 billion?
No, 20 though.
Oh, sorry, Mike. I don't mean to give you any more work, you know. But there's a whole listing: water, sewer, lighting, garbage, solid waste, you know, those kinds of things. They're all involved. 4 CSDs only provide road maintenance to their communities. Lene, Independence Ranch, used to be Ground Squirrel Hollow. So those are the ones that only do that. And then we have 10 county service areas that are governed by the Board of Supervisors, and they provide services to different unincorporated communities. Santa Margarita is one of them. The Country Club has a CSA out there that actually provides service. 9 other special districts, and Neil's going to talk about the resource conservation districts that cover our entire county. And we have Garden Farms has a water district. Port San Luis Harbor District is very involved. And they have a huge, very large service area, actually. Let's get to the community service, the CSDs. This is the Principal Act, right here, under that, and that's the code section, the government code. Here's functions and powers. You'd have a whole listing. And actually, here's one that's getting a lot of play right now, is broadband. A lot of play, and we're going to have a conference, and we have annual conferences for LAFCO, and they're going to talk about broadband. And we're going to talk about that as a service, and what does that mean to activate the broadband service for a CSD? Because broadband is becoming more and more like a utility. And that's how people are starting to look at the broadband issue. It's more and more like a utility as opposed to it being a free market kind of thing. It's going to be a wrestling match to figure that all out. Because I know there's actually law that's being developed right now that talks about this. So community services have 5 directors on their board of directors. There are 11 CSDs. I already said that. Let's move on to the next thing. And they can activate a latent power, but they have to come to LAFCO first. So Ground Squirrel Hollow wanted to activate their solid waste power. They wanted to pick up garbage in the community. They had to come to LAFCO, get approval from us. They had to provide us with a plan for services. How's this going to get done? And a budget. So they had to really inform LAFCO about how they were going to do this particular service and how they were going to pay for it. And that same theory goes through to forming a district, the water district in Paso Robles. They're going to have to provide a plan for services, and in this case the county is, and a budget. How are you going to pay for it? What's it going to be paying for? What type of activities? So there are all your community services districts, and it looks like a lot, but that's 15 of them, and you can see they go from north to south. Up there in northern is San Miguel CSD. You have Heritage Ranch Community Services District, San Simeon, Cambria. You come all the way down to Avila Beach CSD, Oceano, Los Osos, of course, and then Napomo. And you can see California Valley CSD out here, which has roads and solid waste authority at this point in time. And they're spread out throughout the county providing services. I use Mike because he's here. This is the Napomo CSD, and their service area boundary is the green area. That's where they can provide services to. And the blue area is their sphere of influence. The sphere of influence is an area that could be annexed into the CSD if LAFCO approved the application for annexation. Biggest key, and Mike will tell you this too, biggest key for annexations right now is really having the resources to serve the annexation. And when we talk about that, we're talking generally about water and sewer. Having enough water to be able to provide that service to whatever the annexation is. So there's 10 county service areas, and you can see the Principal Act is up there. Again, it's a government code section, and they also have broad-ranging authority. There's a CSA 21, and it's set up, it's county-wide, and they have one single power activated, and it's roads. So So what they can do within CSA 21 is they could, in theory, set up a zone of benefit, a benefit assessment district, and be able to pay for roads in particular areas. Doesn't always happen. It's actually kind of hard to get involved with because you're taking on, you're coming underneath the county, and if you're going to be in a county and maintained road, you then have to bring your road up to county maintained standards, which is pretty high level. So the Board of Supervisors is the governing body, and then also they have to activate their powers through the LAFCO process. Here's something that hardly ever happens. Hold your questions, ma'am. Oh, I'm going to pay for that later. We recently dissolved County Service Area 17, which was in California Valley, and the purpose of that service area when it was set up was to construct power lines and electrical poles. Well, that job was finished. The loans that were taken out by CSA 17 and the work that was done was all done. CSA 17 was just sitting there doing really nothing. And so the county said, why don't we move this on? Dissolve this. And they have to come to LAFCO for that to happen, and we ended up doing that. Yes, Connie?
Oh, can you go back to the Nakoma slide?
You have to go back? Yes.
Just curious, because of that kind of large area, which you call blue, but I call purple, but, no.
You see how this is going to go?
I'm just curious what drives that big section that's not covered in the CSD right there, that whole.
That one?
No, not the white, but below, that whole section.
This.
So you have, no, in between the green and the other green.
The big, in the middle.
In the middle.
That blue one. In the SOI, she's talking about the big SOI up there.
Which one? This
Right
one?
there, yeah.
That one.
That one?
How is the CSD, how did it happen that that large green area above is covered but not?
Ah, interesting question. You knew I'd say that, didn't you? This area up here is Summit Station. Mike will give you the entire history on it. But Summit Station was an area that had very challenging water issues in terms of their wells. This was years and years and years ago, and because they were having failing wells and because they needed services, a community services district could come in and provide those services. They were actually annexed into the district, and the district started managing their water supply situation and started providing service up there. Am I pretty much right, Mike? Pretty much. He'll give you the details. And then, only with districts, this is an interesting question, second part to it, only with special districts can you have annexations that are not contiguous. In other words, that have to be adjacent to. So down here, you have Maria Vista, which is a development down here that is served by the district. The district, actually, they got a pipeline out of it, right? But it's been a difficult and challenging venture to serve that particular project. Is that pipeline, and you'll talk later about that, I'll leave that. But, and then up there, you can add that area non-contiguously. It's not optimal, but in this case, LAFCO made the finding that this would be the best fix for services in this particular area. And I think the history on it was that it was a fairly well debated issue and whether or not to annex it. So, excellent question. You guys know this is going to be so fun. 10 county service areas, and here they are all around the county, and they do various things. Down here we have Napomo CSA 1, which actually does wastewater treatment for just a couple of small areas.
Collection.
Collection. Thank you. You're doing treatment. And you'll talk about that, I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I like pointing out, here's CSA 17 that is no longer. Because we never get rid of government structures, right? Well, we finally got rid of one, so we can point to that. And then CSA 21 is the entire county. And it really acts as a bank, if you will, for roads projects that are in the county. Here's Santa Margarita. That's an example of a fine CSA 23. It provides water, drainage, and lighting. Our house is right about there. Right. And there are 9 other special districts in the county. Cambria Healthcare District, which provides a lot of ambulance services actually up in Cambria. Cayucas Fire District and Cayucas Sanitary District. Cayucas has 3 public agencies providing services in there. That's why it was proposed to do a CSD, and it makes a ton of sense. But I think folks in Cayucas like having all their different boards, and they like having all their different places to go in terms of their services. So they're satisfied, and that's why they voted down the CSD. Another reason why it was voted down, it was in the height of the Los Osos CSD and all of their battles as well. So that affected, I think, the vote for Cayucas CSD to be formed. Garden Farms, we talked a little bit about, and those are all the other types of special districts. And you can see there is the Upper Salinas, Las Tablas RCD, and Neil's going to give us an expose on the RCDs and how they operate and what they do. And here's the boundary of the coastal San Luis RCD. And so you can see those boundaries as well.
What does RCD mean, I forget?
Resource Conservation District. And sorry for all the acronyms. I should have apologized in advance. We've got a ton of them. So that happens. And these are the boundaries of the other districts. Here's a very interesting boundary. This is the Cambria Healthcare District boundary right up here. It is gigantic. And one reason it was made so big is that it's funded with a portion of the property tax. So all of these property owners pay into the Cambria Healthcare District a small amount for services from Cambria Healthcare District. So they have a very steady and a very stable revenue source in terms of their organization. So it's a very interesting dynamic that happens sometimes when they're formed. Now this boundary is another interesting boundary. That's Port San Luis Harbor District's boundary. Very large. And again, they get a small portion of the property tax, which does help fund their organization. But that's one of the reasons it's so large is because all the users, really a lot of users of Port San Luis come from this area, but it's a county-wide resource. I mean, probably a lot of folks use Port San Luis. Oh, I had those. There you go.
Excuse me, what does the Cambria Health District do?
They're responsible for ambulance services up in this entire area, and providing service all the way up to the county line, and sometimes mutual aid service all the way across. And then they also, I believe they have some healthcare clinics that they occasionally will have. So they have, and I don't know the extent of that program though, but they have some of that as well. Healthcare districts, interestingly, statewide, have been under fire. And the reason they've been under fire is this reason right here, where they gather a lot of money, and a lot of the money goes into reserves and sits, and not a lot of it gets spent on programming. So there's been a lot of discussion about healthcare districts on a statewide basis. In fact, there was some legislation to maybe change that and the way that worked, which was fought mightily by the healthcare district folks who are doing good work. But there are some districts, healthcare districts, that are just holding on to the money, and the money's not really being used. And it's an interesting dynamic. So that was happening statewide. Let's see. Oh, one of my favorites, 11 cemetery districts. And there are many one-liners that are associated with this, but I'm going to avoid them all. I hope. But they are governed by a board of trustees that are appointed by the board of supervisors for the cemetery districts. And the board of supervisors can function as a governing board for cemetery districts, but typically they choose not to. They choose to appoint it, and they are underneath the health and safety code. And cemetery districts have a large bunch of code that actually governs how they do their business, how they do interments, and those type of services that they provide. And this is a map of all the cemetery districts and all of their different boundaries. And you can see Rio Grande is in the South County. That's this one right here. Very large, and they do a lot of interments every year, provide a lot of services to the folks of South County. The other one that does a lot of work is Paso Robles, up in here. Very organized, very professional cemetery program. Cambria, I don't know if you've ever visited Cambria's cemetery. It's a beautiful spot. The one that I really think is interesting is Adelaida. And Adelaida has got the moss hanging from the oak trees, and it's just a really beautiful. In fact, they have, my understanding is they have 2 Civil War veterans who were interred there. But that might be a ghost story, so I tried to avoid it. So you have all of the cemetery districts that are also responsible for those services. Oh, there they all are again. And you can see. And that's Paso Robles, and that's their boundary. And up here, interestingly, is Estrella Pleasant Valley Cemetery District, which is, they do very, very few interments, 1 a year maybe. And one thing that LAFCO does every once in a while is we'll do a sphere of influence study, and we'll say, well, gee, this district should be consolidated or merged or annexed into Paso Robles. So we've made that finding that that should happen. It hasn't happened yet, but it is something that's on the table. What's coming up for us? We've got the formation of the Paso Robles Groundwater Basin Water District. I can talk about that later, maybe in question and answer time. We'll talk more about the details. And then just a summary, the special districts, to me, they're unsung heroes. You don't hear a lot about what they do. You don't hear a lot about the work that they get done, but they get a ton of work done for their local communities at the local level. In our county in particular, we're pretty lucky to have special districts that are so organized and actually well managed and really do a great job for the most part of providing services to the communities in San Luis Obispo County. And so I look at them as unsung heroes in terms of the work that gets done in our county. And you know, they have a lot of challenges. They have ups and downs like every other government agency. One thing about LAFCO is, and our philosophy is, we're not here to bail out an agency. Los Osos got into trouble. Well, then some folks wanted to dissolve them. Maybe that'll solve the problem. I don't think that solves the problem. I think you got to deal with your issues and get through it. But our districts, in general and overall, they do a great job, and it's great to work with them too. They will call and ask questions. They'll work with me on issues. Sometimes LAFCO's viewed it. We are a regulatory agency for them, so I like to think we have a pretty good relationship and rapport. And we'll hand it off back to Neil, I guess. Oh, you want me to do a few questions?
Time for a couple questions,
Yeah.
and then we'll move on.
Okay. Yeah.
Should I put it on?
Oh yeah. Here.
Yes,
I'll
please.
come over with you.
Thank you so much. I would suppose the money that comes in to fund these various districts is a stable fund collected somehow, and then the directors of this group vote a budget. Where's the people input? Who decides what these people should be doing? How does that happen? What are the mechanics?
I'll give you a couple. I'll answer it generally. Mike will probably get into that in his presentation.
It's the other district.
Well, and districts are funded with different sources. So some do get a portion of the property tax. That some are what are called enterprise districts. So they provide water and sewer, and they're based on fees. And so they get money from the fees that they charge. How they spend that money is usually, when you're talking about something that's for a fee, it has to be spent then on the water, the provision of the water services, or the provision of the wastewater services. Now there may be some limited variation from that, but in general, if you're providing those services, it's based on rates and fees. If you have a portion of the property tax for, sometimes it's for a very specific service. So it could be for fire. Oceano gets a portion of the property tax to provide fire service. So that's what that goes for. And they can't move that. They can't deviate. It's designated for that area. How do they get feedback? Well, like a lot of other government agencies, you elect your board. They're representative government. They have public meetings. They're subject to the Brown Act. A lot of them go through goal setting A lot of them go through, I know they all go through annual budget, establishing of their budgets, and that's a very public process. Particularly the larger CSDs like Napomo or like Templeton or Cambria. I think Cambria has like almost an $8 or $9 million budget. So I look at CSDs, they are cities without land use authority. Land use authority is still retained by the county, but a CSD does all the functions of a city minus land use authority, and usually minus police as well. The sheriff usually is providing services there.
Who decides the distribution of the property tax?
Usually that's been set at a particular percentage. You're either early on when the district was formed, or at a time when the rate is now. If you ever do a property tax now, you have to go through what's called Prop 218. So, for instance, Cambria Healthcare District gets a portion of the property tax, a small portion, it's a very small percentage. That was established a long time ago. If they're going to increase it, they're going to have to go through a Prop 218 vote, which is basically a vote to increase the taxes. And Mike, I know, loves Prop 218, so he's going to... It's part of something that we all have to deal with. And Prop 218 makes sure that we don't that government agencies just don't raise taxes unnecessarily. It's there as a check and a balance at this point. Yes, sir. Here you go. I'm talking to Mike.
Bruce Beard, the Templeton resident. How is LAFCO itself funded?
Yeah, we're funded 1/3 by the county. Our budget is approved by, back up a little bit, budget's approved by the commission, by LAFCO. Usually it's approved in April. And it's funded by 1/3 of the budget is funded by the county, 1/3 is funded by the cities, and 1/3 is funded by the special districts. So we spread the pain across everybody. And actually that keeps the cost down for everybody. The 1/3 that is funded to the special districts and the cities, what happens there is it's prorated, and it's based on their revenues. So the district with the higher level of revenues, Cambria, for example, or Napomo has high revenues as well, they would pay a larger proportional cost of the 1/3 amount. So the cost of LAFCO is spread across all the different jurisdictions.
Okay. Why don't we move on? Thanks a lot, Dave. As an example of one of the larger and, shall we say, more powerful or more influential districts, we asked Mike LeBrun to come and talk about the Napomo Community Service District. Mike is a graduate of Cal Poly. He graduated from there in 1993 after serving 6 years in the United States Navy. He went and worked at the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, our local regional board, for a number of years, and then went to Napomo. I think you were there as the executive director, and then took a kind of a sabbatical and was working for a number of years with the Land Conservancy of San Luis Obispo County on restoration projects and that sort of thing. But they wanted him back at Napomo, and he's been back there for a number of years now as their general manager. I'm sorry, not executive director, as their general manager. So please welcome Mike, and he'll tell us about the Napomo Community Services District. Mike.
Thank you, Neil. And thanks to the League for having me today and entertaining the topic that maybe many folks aren't that interested in, but I think that's a good segue by David and by Neil. Let me see what my slides tell me here. That tells me who I am and the district I work for. I'm in the right spot. Napomo Community Services District, a little background on us. We're by the information I get off the LAFCO website, Napomo is the third oldest community services district, only behind San Simeon and California Valley. But that makes us the oldest multi-service community services district in the county. We were formed just about 50 years ago. We just celebrated our 50-year anniversary on January 28th this year. Formed initially back in '65 to address local water and sanitation issues. In Napomo at the time, a booming community, failing septic systems, and not very well completed private and some small water company wells. Those two systems were getting together and causing illness throughout the community. And the county came down and said, no problem, we've got a fix for this. We're just going to form us one of these county services areas, and we're going to, government's here to save the town of Napomo. And if any of you ever been down in Napomo, very independent. This is where the immigrant mother picture was shot by Dorothea Lange. These are the generations of people who still exist in Napomo, fiercely independent. And they said, thank you, but no thank you, county. We will take use of this new community services district law that the state has just enacted a few years prior to this, and we will form our own community services district, and we will deal with our own problem. And that's what Napomo did in '65. They had their first water system by 1966. In 1970 or so, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, that's a state agency that I did work for, not at this time, but back in 1970, I was still in high school, I think. But at that time, the Regional Board issued a cease and desist order and a septic system use prohibition on two communities in the county, Napomo and Los Osos. And in late 1970s, Napomo had a vote to build a sewer and it failed. And by mid-1980, Napomo had its next vote to build the sewer and it barely passed. And of course, Los Osos took a bit of a longer route, and they're about to get their first sewer done. And in the meantime, Napomo built a sewer, we expanded a sewer. We recently rebuilt our sewer from what we had been using, primary plant, basic technology, to advanced technology that sets us up for moving on and continuing to support our community as it grows to its vision as defined in the county's general plan. So we're very proud of that, and as well along the way we've continued to develop our water resources and trying to keep up with, again, a county planning department sets the criteria for planning, growth, and development in our community, and it is a special district, the water district. It's our job is to be there to meet those community growth needs. That's a challenge. And so when they formed in '65, the first order of business of the board of directors, the formational meeting, is they decided which seat, who was going to hold which seat, and when you first form, you get 1-year seats and 2-year seats, and so they did that. They elected a president, and they said, okay, next and most important order of business, we need to raise funds. So every one of you knew 5 directors, $10 each. This is 1965. There was an engineer in the audience who was doing client development, I can only assume. He pitched in $1. And they then defined at the end of that formational meeting, okay, we got $51. They handed it over to a person they declared to be their secretary and said, go get a P.O. box and some writing materials. This is literally what happened in '65, 50 years ago. We are preparing now our budget. Well, our fiscal 14-15 budget that we're in right now is about a $9 million revenue and expenditure budget. On top of that, we're in the middle of this $40 million in capital improvement projects between water and wastewater that the district's taken on in the last 3 or 4 years. We've completed now the wastewater plant, and by July we'll complete the $17 million water project. But suffice it to say, we've grown significantly in 50 years. Back then, initially, there were a couple hundred connections to that initial water system. We now have 4,300 connections to our water system and about 3,500 connections to our sewer system. We do have a number of customers who are on septic systems. They're outside the prohibition area in the more rural areas that we serve water. So the form of government has served the community well. But it is something that folks are sometimes confused by. We'll often get people come in and they don't like what they hear from the elected board of directors or from the general manager, and they'll say, well, I'm heading off to the supervisor to go talk to them about that, and you'll see what you get, you know. And we say, you know, we're entirely independent of the county. We're entirely independent of the federal and the state government. Now, we're entirely independent, but if we want to get involved in a grant program or some program the county has, we'll often, of course, understand how money flows and how to work together with other local governments as needed. But that's a bit about the background of Napomo CSD. I mean, this, and I know you can't read it, huh?
Nice job.
Did you see that? Wow. I know you can't read it, but this is, I just laid it out there for on purpose, just to show. This, what it's showing us is here we formed in 1965. We had about 1,400 acres of land when we incorporated. These are the various annexations that we've either attempted or, well, that we've attempted over the years. Some have been denied. We've had some detachments over the years. I did a detachment, actually, a property owner wanted out. In any event, so that's the summation of that over the years, and now we are up at about 4,400 acres of land, and David showed you that picture. This is a similar picture laid over an aerial, but it shows we have our red boundary, which is our current services boundary. As you noted on David's picture, it is disjointed. This is the Summit Station area. This is what we now call Costa Pacifica, but was Maria Vista Estates when it was initially embarked upon as a development. And then the yellow line is our sphere of influence. The Summit Station area, actually, it was annexed in. It was an emergency annexation that was done and LAFCO approved, but was pushed through in the early 90s. And indeed, it was because wells were running dry up in this area. That's because we were in the middle of a drought at that time. In any event, we did work with the area. It ended up being a bit problematic in that once water got up in that area, the next thing that some of the landowners wanted to do was subdivide and take advantage of the fact that now they had community water, so we can get some more density, right? And the board struggled long and hard with the supervisors, frankly, on those issues. But ultimately, we have resolved that. And they are being, you know, they're part of the supplemental water project and part of the district's overall water resource projects and perspectives. But it is, and frankly, some of the private property owners up here chose not to, while they're within the district boundaries, they're still on a private well. And that's fine, and they can do that. But private wells in the area, then, you know, the drought went away, and we started bringing water to the area, and of course everything's on septic systems up here, so the local water got a boost from our imported water, and there was less demand, and so private well owners were like, oh, my well's just fine. I never need to connect with you guys. Well, now this drought's putting all that to a test, because I get calls weekly from people who are just outside this boundary. And I had a call from this property owner here. Wells are going dry across the mesa as well, and folks would like to join into the district. But we're not even talking to folks that are outside, literally outside our services boundary now, because the district's current plans for water resources, we can only see as far and go as far as our current services boundary. That's all we can afford, and that's all we're undertaking right now. It's a huge undertaking to develop water resources now. Please, a question from you.
Just going back to 1965, I'm just curious. You said that the
Can
whole.
you get the mic, please?
Oh.
I was pointing at that.
Going back to 1965, was it the county public works that determined the septics were failing in what was Napomo at the time, and was that really what precipitated the development of the CSD?
Right. So it was actually the county health officer at the time and county health department that defined, and working with the state regulatory agencies, there were failing septic systems. There was typhoid. There was a typhoid outbreak in Napomo. My reading is 4 or 5 cases, and so the county health officer came down. They did some study. There was found that in a number of the private water systems, there were some small water systems and some private wells, and there was fecal coliform bacteria and high levels of nitrate. So the cross connection. This is not uncommon. in rural settings that outgrow the ability of septic systems in shallow drilled private wells. Not uncommon at all. So again, the county then came down and said, you know, we're going to form a county services area and get this taken care of for you. And then that's what the community said. And it was interesting because we've done so much with the 50-year history this year. One of our founding directors actually is still in the community. He came back for the anniversary meeting. But these, at the time, it was 5 gentlemen were elected, but there were a couple ladies running at the time as well. But these folks were in their late 30s, early 40s. My board now is all retired gentlemen who are making the time to give back to the community. But at this time, these folks, they were developers and builders in the community. They had a investment of their family and their business in Napomo, and they wanted to set the groundwork to make Napomo, you know, continue to be the independent community it was and allow it to grow. It was a really neat story in talking to some of them, and that everybody pitch in $10 thing. It's incredible to think about where that was, and we reflect on that. My staff reflects on it, I reflect on it, my board does. We're proud to be part of that, and know that in 50 years from now, there'll be somebody else telling the story and hopefully talking about those folks that, you know, built that important wastewater plant or brought in those important water resources and diversified our supply for our community and allowed it to continue. That's a neat thing about being, and so you heard my history. I worked active duty Navy, as in the reserves also. So I worked for the federal government in a sense. Then I worked for state government. And then when I first came down to Napomo, and that was in 2004, I frankly had no idea what I was in for. And got knocked out of the water. I mean, it was a huge amount of work. The demands, and it's you're right there with your customers. There is no buffer. You were there. And so I had to step out, and fortunately, the good people of Los Osos threw Mr. Bruce Buell out of his office as general manager at that time, and we got Bruce down into Napomo, and he spent what ended up being the last 3 years of his life. He was just a consummate public administrator. He set a number of things in place that weren't there when I first arrived in 2004. And so when Bruce then in 2009 had to take leave, medical leave to fight cancer that would eventually take him just 3 months later, I came back into a situation that was much improved. It was, I could, while it was still a huge load, I could, you know, there was a light there, and I could work, and I have been able to work through it. So the community owns so much to that man, to Bruce Buell, for the time he served, and we're in a better place for it. Anyway, so that's where we stand today. This is something I like to share with people. I generally I share it every time we sit down with a new supervisor, and we've done that quite a few times here in South County because of Supervisor Teixeira's untimely death a few years ago. But I say this is it. This is everybody that's employed at Napomo Community Services District, and here are all the admin staff. There it is. These people are all directly involved in the day-to-day operations, 24/7. We operate 2 wastewater plants. We operate 8 different supply wells, miles and miles of water distribution, sewage collection, and sewage treatment facilities. And so these are office admin staff. When you call our phone number, you're going to talk to one of these ladies here. If they're all busy, you're going to talk to me. I'll be answering the phone. So and I point that out because often with the county, I interface most often with the Public Works and or the Planning Department. Either one of those departments dwarfs me. I mean, they have, often I'll get a well-meaning person at the county saying, well, who do I talk to schedule your time? Who's your... And I just say, you got to be... I schedule my time. Nobody else got time to schedule my time. So we're very small, and we are. Every one of these folks, we're public employees. We're public servants. People say, but I have never worked in a more motivated office, and I've done some private side consulting and private work in my lifetime as well. I've never worked with a more committed group of folks. To me, it's just the right balance and the right level. We're local government, but we're small. We all know each other. there's no room for dead wood or drifters or people who are just gliding along, and we don't have any of that. We've had some of that. I've done. And it's not something I'm proud of, but we terminate people when it doesn't work out. When I have staff who are not performing, we move to terminate. When I was with the state, I can assure you that is something that I could not do. And that when I went to the management level finally at the state, it was too much. I could not. That was something I just couldn't reconcile with, because you didn't have a disciplinary process that you could really, that was effective. Here we had that. We're small. We're well supported, and then these 5 folks up here are customers of the district who are available to the other. You know, when I have people that don't like what I'm saying and they want to talk to somebody else, any one of my board of directors will speak to these folks. They're the neighbors. They pay the same water bills. It's at some point, sometimes folks get upset because they wish they had another level of government to go at and yell at us or make us change our minds because they think what we're doing is wrong. And to them I say, well, every 2 years, at least 2 seats on that board are up for election. We have run uncontested. Well, this last election we were uncontested. We had 20 years of service step off the board, and we had one person re-up for his second term, and 2 new, 1 returning and 1 new face come out of the community. It was a perfect election, but it wasn't controversial. Had just as many people apply as we had open seats, and we've had a number of years in this last decade where again it wasn't highly contested, and that's. We're proud of that and the fact that we've been doing quite a bit of work. We've been, the 218 process, when we set rates, let me speak a little bit about our funding, and I don't have a slide good for that. Here's our website, transparency. Websites are so great now for public agencies. If I don't have it on my website and you want it, I'm going to have it on my website so that I can just point you to it. It's a great thing. Where did I want to go before I went that? Funding. Just budget-wise, I talked about our gross overall budget, but we're enterprise funded, which, again, I think David touched on it. We separately account for our water fund. We have 2 different sewer plants we operate. They're 2 different collection systems. So we have the town sewer fund, and we have the Black Lake Village sewer fund. And only the people who are served by the Black Lake Village sewer pay into that fund. And they pay every cost it is of running that sewer. They're paying for that, and it's through those sewer charges. And same with the water side. And then we have solid waste, and we do some other limited services. But those are the main portions of it. We don't have a general fund. We do receive a fractional property pass-through. David talked about that. Those are typically set, like when we do annexations, those are one of the points of negotiation with the county, is what fraction of the property taxes will be passed through to the district if we annex that area. Some areas we get no pass-through property tax on. That was a bad annexation in my mind. I don't understand why they did it. But total property pass-through is on the order of about $500,000 a year of income the district sees against its $9 million of basic revenue expenditure. And all in the last 3 years, in order to fund the supplemental water project, that my board of directors is convinced, and as am I, that it's a very important project for our entire community. One of the things the board of directors committed 100% of was its property tax reserves, which they had built up a couple million in reserves. They put all that toward the capital of the pipeline. And then our first income to pay off the bond debt that we had to incur, they committed those property taxes to. So, and that's our bond debt annually for the pipeline bond is a $750,000 annual principal and interest payment. And so the first 500 of that is paid for by $500,000 by those property taxes, and then the rest is made up by rates and charges in our water district, just to our water customers. So that enterprise funding element is very important. It's also one of the things that makes it difficult. Some folks in our community wanted to see the district activate park powers. That's one of our latent powers we don't have active. We had some local folks, they wanted to see a local park done, a community park. The county parks didn't want to do it, so they came to the district. And the district was open to that idea, and we worked with these local folks, working with LAFCO, made our application. We worked with the county to take over the property once we get Park Powers active through LAFCO. The key element was, of course, funding, as David said. And so our funding plan was to set up a park assessment district immediately surrounding the park, a zone of benefit to the properties that would benefit most. It was a minor assessment. Everything adds up, but I want to say $36 a year to a property that was in the highest zone of benefit. The assessment district failed. Nobody wanted to see additional tax, property tax of any sort, so it failed. And when it failed, then the application to LAFCO ultimately expired, and the folks who want to see that park still come to the board. We're still trying to work with them, and they said, why can't you look at all the reserves? Look at all those solid waste reserves, because we have the solid waste franchise, so we have some reserves in our solid waste fund. Use that money for the park. You can't do it. Use some of that water fund of yours. You got millions. Use that for the park. Can't do it. Can't do it. Won't do it. It's not appropriate to do it. And so we have to find, and the way it has to happen to get this park to work is we've got to get those local homes and this local community behind it. And if and when we get back to an assessment and vote again, we can't let that one slip away. And I know that group, it pains them. They know that's a very hard-learned lesson. It was this close. That was 2009, right when I came back for Bruce, and we missed that election. So, but again, that's our website. I'd welcome anyone there anytime. We really work on that. Transparency is a big issue for special districts, for any public agency. If you don't appear to be transparent, you're going to lose trust right away. When I get public records requests, one of the things it's a typical thing in a public agency, you get public records requests. The law says I've got 10 days to respond. All I have to do is say, hey, thank you for your request. It's going to take me another 2 months to get to it. Our goal is, as soon as I get that request, I'd like, by close of business, I'd like to have an email back to the person and records produced if at all possible. Because most often all I'm doing is pointing to my website. And again, if I don't have it there, if it's a necessary record, I make sure it gets up there. And then that usually calms people right away and says, these folks don't have anything to hide. Let me look at this a little bit, and then we'll move on. But we do, it was asked, how do we set our budget setting process? Typically, we're very fortunate. We've got a very stable administrative staff. Our finance director has been there over 20 years. Our budgets we're audited every year. We've never had so much as a qualification on our audit. And last year, our finance director took it upon herself to submit our audit for review by. Let me see if I can get this right. It's a CAFR. It's an advanced audit review, a more in-depth audit review, and it's recognized by a public agency and accountants, and it's a government finance board or some such thing. In any event, something that, as far as we know, no other special district in the community has done in order to reach that accolade of this CAF, or this level of review and recognition for excellency in public accounting. And that's something we did in our audit of our fiscal 13-14, and we've also put it in our I'm sorry, of 12-13, we put in our 13-14 for similar recognition. One thing I do want to note, and this is my last slide, about special districts, and about, because we all know some of the struggles, I think, that you see in local headlines. Special districts make local headlines too often. Is one of the things that can happen is that if the customers of that district are complacent and don't get involved in this local government, then the board can get off track, and the board, and it can become a very volatile situation. And you've seen now, we've seen some more stability here in recent time in both Los Osos and Oceano, and frankly Napomo. But all these special districts have gone through periods in their history where they might see 7 general managers in 5 years. That's very difficult for staff. Again, you've got an elected board that meets twice a month, maybe once a month. They hire a general manager, and the general manager is the lead of your staff and the lead of the entire crew there. If the general manager is a rotating seat, anybody who's worked in any organization knows that the staff are going to struggle. The organization's going to struggle. So usually a district will survive that, especially when you like to look at the CSDs if they've got a good, stable number 2. Again, at our district, her name is Lisa Bognuda. She's been our finance director and assistant general manager for over 20 years. She does not inspire to be the general manager ever because it's a hot seat. It's a public seat. It's not one for everybody. And I would say it's one of the most important elements is to have that number 2 who likes being number 2, who really day to day, I know who the boss is. I make sure that I'm doing right by Lisa because she knows these things. She's been there long enough, and she's a stability. So that would be my message, though, to folks is don't take them for granted. And we've seen that happen. You don't want it's not good for a community when you're seeing the types of things go on where the general managers are in and out, and there's forensic audits, and everyone's up in arms about what's going on. Because at the end of the day, all the bills of the CSD are paid by its customers. And like David said, LAFCO's not going to bail you out. So if you get your CSD in trouble. That was really all I had. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I don't know that, it's always hard to guess what might interest folks or anything in particular about Napomo or other community services districts that I can help. I'd be happy to take any questions now or we can do it at the end. Since the microphone, I'll take
Do we
it.
have a second mic on the table now?
Okay, great.
Thank you. Every so often, the issue of shall Napomo be a city comes up. Are you talking about it now? What would change you from CSD to a city?
Right. I think that question comes up especially when folks struggle with how come, if we're in the middle of a drought, how can more homes be approved? I think my home should have been the last one built in the community. Maybe that's not what they say, but sometimes that's what I think I'm hearing. And that's when folks struggle, because one thing a CSD will never have is planning power. And so they say, well, we want planning power. But the last time Napomo looked at it, and they did a full-blown study, and the study was completed just when I arrived in 04-05. And as David said, it's funding. The issue is funding. And I think the last city formed in California was Buellton, if I'm not mistaken. It's one of the last cities formed.
There's been some recent ones in Southern California.
Have there?
Harupa,
situation.
Harupa Valley was recently formed, last couple of years. They're struggling.
Yeah.
And they're struggling because the state funding mechanisms that are in place aren't keeping up with their expenses. So it's a very difficult
yeah, a lot of people point
situation.
back to Prop 13 when it became so difficult then, and rightfully so in some ways. It depends. We're all we're all taxpayers and fee payers, but as well, that's what a lot of people will point back to is when we stopped funding our schools the way we should, and people want their service. They expect water service 24/7, 365. They expect when the toilet flushes, they don't care where, just away, always. And we also expect, and we also are continuing to pass more and more rigorous regulations on how these services are provided and how to mitigate the impacts of those services on our environment. So, and so people expect us to be 100% compliant, and we're very proud with our regulatory compliance in Napomo. But the other expectation then is that we fix that price and it never goes up. In fact, I've got some people who tell me they were guaranteed it would never go up. Show me that piece of paper, right? And so it's very difficult. So we do go to raising rates, and I've been through a number of what is called the 218 process. It's a public process where you go through a lengthy rate study to define why the water enterprise or the sewer enterprise. Again, I only raise water rates based on what my water enterprise needs. So we do that study. We show what the plans are for the capital improvements, for the maintenance, for the operations, and then we show what our incomes are and what our income gaps, and then we say, so in this process, typically we'll take 9 months to a year. I make sure that we do, our board typically meets on a regular meeting at 9 o'clock on Wednesday mornings, because the business is not something that the general public is typically involved with. But when we're doing rate settings, we're out at night, and I go out to our Black Lake community and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because that's when I get the most of them folks to come out. And so we really reach out, and then ultimately, then we go out to the vote of the community. And we've been successful generally. We've had some defeats, but when you get defeated, all the process I just described is money we just spent out of that same fund that needs more money to hire the rate consultants, go through the processes, do these things. And now if we failed, things are getting worse because costs certainly are going up, and my income. So we go back and we do it again. But that's why we work real hard to make sure our rates are justified, and that we can show, again, through transparency, our customers that we're managing efficiently. But sometimes efficiently means, I mean, again, we're talking about water and sewer services. We have a fleet that does not, our service vehicles don't go over 100,000 miles. Once they are, they're going to be moved out. I can't have, again, it's the type of services that we provide, I think, are probably the most critical services any property receives. And there's something that, South County Sanitation, for instance, is facing millions of dollars of fines for a sewer overflow. The last thing I want to do is have a sewer overflow because I was trying to get an extra $50,000 out of that old 1980 vintage Ford F-250 that, so sometimes there's that type of explanation that needs to happen with our customers. And again, budget adoption, we're in that process now. We're always happy to explain why we're doing things, and I can't always make folks happy, but at least if I can get their understanding, they'll give me one of these, okay. So, I'm sorry, yeah, another question.
In the map shown earlier, the sphere of influence area appears to almost equal the current service area.
We have...
Or be very close to it. And I was just wondering about there was one much earlier, like slide number 4.
Right. Back. Yeah, that's... Dave,
yeah, you can just go back.
Keep going all the way back.
Yeah.
It is an easier map to look at.
It was an easy one to see.
There
it is.
Oh, I already hit it.
Go forward 3. One more.
Go.
Next one.
No, it's...
There you are.
Good.
So the blue appears to almost equal the green, which is the current service area. What is the landscape of possible annexations by the district?
Yeah, actually, I think that sphere looks huge. This blue area, there is quite a bit of this land out here, even within our services boundary out in this area. This land is zoned, and some of it's underdeveloped or undeveloped out in this area in Napomo. And much of this land within this immediate area is underdeveloped. This is where the county's really is focused on more high-density, multi-use types of homes within our green. Now, in the blue, this is rangeland right here, right now, and there's what the county calls a specific plan earmarked for this particular property, which says you might look to do something specific, specific little development on this property. There's also a specific plan earmarked for this property down here, right adjacent to our wastewater plant. We have 2 conditional annexations right now that are right on this. One's right here, and one sits right off the boundary here. So there's potential for annexations. One area that's unlikely, and actually it's a scenario I don't like to think about, but this down here, it's hard to tell, but this is mostly developed 1-acre lots. It's served by Golden State Water Company. If anybody, they're out in Los Osos too. They're one of the largest private, for-profit, publicly traded water companies. I work for a public agency, and I'm not certain it's the best idea to have a for-profit agency managing water resources. I don't want to say, but I think when you're looking at a business model that says what's our that is answering to stockholders that want to see profits on a 10-year plan. selling water. Anyway, so the scenario is, though, Golden State's down here. We're not taking over Golden State. The only reason we'd ever move out to serve water out here is if the basin totally tanks and Golden State doesn't see any profitability in the area anymore, and they leave. And then they'll leave, then the community services will figure out a way to step in, as the public agency. Other than that, we do provide, and this is where I say the county CSA 1, they're down here collecting wastewater in some of the very high-density developments that the county approved way back when, mobile home parks on community septic systems. Didn't work out really well. This was all back in the 50s and 60s. And so when the regional board, the state agency, came in and said, no more of the septic tank stuff in the high densities county, they included areas of Golden State down here. So under an agreement with the county, it's an outside services agreement that LAFCO had to approve, and the county and the district worked together. The county actually operates some collection system at these mobile home and other high-density urban development, typical urban development. They operate a collection system that includes a couple lift stations, sewage lift stations, and then at a point they define that they deposit that waste that they've collected into our collection system, and we convey it the rest of the way down and treat it here at our wastewater plant. Those customers, they pay for the sewage on their property taxes, and the county collects it, and that's the only way we'd enter into that. Because believe it or not, when you bill a couple thousand customers every month like we do, we have 4,500, but we bill bi-monthly. So every month we send out a couple thousand bills. And there's about a handful that you've got to go all the way to the point of turning their water off before they're going to pay that bill. And we do that every month. Because if I allow bills to go uncollected, then the customer who's paying the bills pays the uncollected bills by default, and we don't allow that. So if a sewer customer doesn't pay their bill, I can't turn the sewer off. There's actually not a valve there to do it. Even if I could, I wouldn't, because it would make things pretty. But the only way we're going to do a sewer service to somebody we don't do water service to is through an agreement with the county whereby they collect on the property taxes, and they assure that we are paid each year, and they pay us twice a year for that. So that's how that's.
That might be a reflection of the efficiency of your organization, because if that were an incorporated city, those sphere of influence areas may have been gobbled up by now.
That's true, and if we were Detroit, you guys know, I mean, Detroit's water system almost went bankrupt because they let so many people slide on their bills forever, and so I know that's kind of a different point than you just made, but again, it's very important to us in local form of government to be able to answer to our customers and that we're being responsible. Now, some customers, and we know them all by name, you can see the same folks. And, so anyway, a question.
Let's take one more question here.
I may be the only one here that doesn't recognize all that. I'm trying to figure out what I'm looking at. Where is Teft Road?
Sure. Yeah, that's one part where my map was better, but David's is better for the sphere. Taft and Thompson are Napomo's Main Street and Broadway, if you will. And this, Taft, just because I know, it bisects this section of green right here. And that's Taft at the 101. So that's our, now we have Willow Road, and that's up in here, Willow Road off-ramps right there. So Taft, and then Thompson runs up right here, and it's the old alignment of what was Highway 1. And that's why, so the core, Jocko's, world famous Jocko's, okay, that's right down, that's our Main Street and Broadway of Napomo. And then
The only place in Napomo is them.
is Jocko's. Most folks, and so then, and then as well, much of our growth though has been out to the west, but this core of Old Town Napomo, back in its day, it was the bigger municipality than the city of Santa Maria. But this was back in the day. Oh, I'm sorry. This is back in the day. And actually, as I understand it, Napomo burnt down a couple times. And then Santa Maria got ahead of them. But, Santa Maria was no place to form a city because it got flooded all the time until we got the Twitchell Dam and things in. I mentioned fire, and I'll leave it. The last thing is water districts and community water systems were first formed to fight fire. That was our primary function. That's why water districts were first formed. And if you've ever carried a gallon of water, you remember the old day, it was bucket brigades, and you had to move water from the well to where the fire was, and that's why the Old West, every town in the Old West burnt down routinely. And so water it weighs about 8 pounds a gallon, and it's very heavy and very difficult to move. And so setting up a community water system with fire protection, we have over 4 million gallons sitting in storage at any one time, ready to service any of our nearly 700 fire hydrants that are placed throughout the community. And we have over 5,000 gallons per minute of well production capability to back those hydrants further if needed. And that's a real primary service that comes to the entire community of Nipomo thanks to that water system. So, thanks again for having me. You want that one too?
Okay. And that's just forward. Okay. We'll see if I can
Keep going.
I'll see if I can find.
Sorry about that with the microphone.
Keep going.
I want to just show that one for a second. The Coastal San Luis Resource Conservation District in green, and our sister agency, the Upper Salinas Las Tablas Resource Conservation District, much larger. I don't really know their history, but I think that dash tells me that there used to be 2 of them, and they got merged. I think that's what happened. Oops. Okay. Well, I'll just give you a brief introduction of myself. My name is Neil Havlik, and I am the president of the board of directors of a special district in San Luis Obispo County called the Coastal San Luis Resource Conservation District, one of 2 that we have in our county. I'm a graduate of Cal Poly, a little before these guys, class of '68. I worked with a special district up in the Bay Area for many years, and I'm thinking this might have been one that was created by special legislation called the East Bay Regional Park District, which was formed way back in the 1930s, actually at the height, I guess you'd say the depth of the Depression in 1934. I worked for the city of San Luis Obispo from 1996 until my retirement in 2012. But I've served most of that time on the board of directors of the Resource Conservation District, and as is the president, I guess I've been president for about the last 8 years. I don't know. It's been a while. We're a little different. David had mentioned about the entities that get some property tax and the enterprise programs, and Mike filled you in on that. We're a little bit different. We have no, what would you call it? We have no dedicated source of income for our district. Now, some resource conservation districts in some counties throughout the state and in other states do get a portion of property tax or some other form of dedicated revenue or income that comes to them. We do not, so we operate entirely on grants and contracts and service agreements that we make. In our case, we do have we've been doing pretty well in the last few years, such that we actually hired a district manager, a lady by the name of Jackie Crabb. Some of you may know her. She used to work for the Farm Bureau. And up in the Upper Salinas, they have an executive director, a little different title, a fellow by the name of Devin Best. What we do is to work with private landowners and public agencies to work on protection of water and soil and vegetation resources. We operate in the area that you saw in green, coastal portions of San Luis Obispo County, up to about a little north of Morro Bay, and beyond that is part of the Upper Salinas Las Tablas district. For example, Cambria is within the boundaries of the Upper Salinas Las Tablas district. We are not a regulatory agency. We have no policing powers with the government or really at all. We work with nonprofit organizations, private landowners, and public agencies, as I mentioned, to bring technical expertise and resources to our local agriculturalists and other entities and individuals. RCDs were formed under some acts back under the New Deal back in the mid-1930s. Some of you may recall some of the pictures, the stuff you'd see of the Dust Bowl and of erosion problems and poor soil conservation practices that were going on, particularly in the South at that time. We had them here as well. There are pictures you can see of the Arroyo Grande area with huge gullies going down hillsides and erosion problems. And there was just a lack of real knowledge and expertise about soil conservation. So the federal government created the what was then called the Soil Conservation Service, and the mechanism for outreach of using public monies to benefit private lands that also had a public benefit, i.e. erosion control or water conservation, was the creation of resource conservation districts. And sometimes they're called other things like water conservation districts or soil and water conservation districts, but they're basically the same. The same setup nationwide. In California, we're authorized under part of the Public Resources Code. We are considered agents of the state or subdivisions, although they're created and operated sort of on basically within the county basis. There are some that are multi-county or may stretch a little bit out. Upper Salinas, Las Tablas District, for example, includes a small area of Monterey County. I don't know if you remember the map that Dave showed. There's a little piece down around Nipomo that is part of the Cachuma Resource Conservation District, which is primarily in Santa Barbara County. And it just has to do with the resources and the expertise that the various districts have had and made available when they were formed. And I say we're independently funded, no real financial support from the state or federal, or really in that from the local government in the form of property taxes or a piece of that pie. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about what we have done. We've been successful, although there was a time, I'm going to say about 7 or 8 years ago, we thought we might actually close our doors. We were down to 1 employee, and he was a local engineering fellow, and he was actually resigned, and we thought maybe that was going to be it for a while, and then we actually. In the form of manna from heaven, the state created a program called the Watershed Coordinator Program, which helped RCDs like us and other agencies to have a program which we were told, go out there and do good deeds on soil and water and vegetation conservation, and that really kind of saved us. And since then, we've done quite well. Our budget currently is around $500,000 a year, maybe a little larger if we have a project that's out there to be done. We have a staff currently of about 7 people, and a couple part-time. So we've been very, very pleased with our progress over the last few years, but not having that stable source of income is a problem. And a couple of years ago, we were kind of worried about things where things got pretty bad for a while. But one of I guess we have expertise, okay? And it turns out that people come to us for that expertise. And so we've been able to come up with some innovative solutions to problems. One, this is a problem in agricultural regions all over the world, really. High levels of nitrate in drainage water. Nitrogen is added, put in fertilizers into the water that's sprayed on crops to just help them grow. Well, that stuff doesn't all get picked up by the by the plants, and some of it washes away in what's called agricultural tailwaters. And so then it gets into the creeks and lakes and causes algae blooms and other problems. So one of the ways to try to treat this is to look at simple low technology solutions. And we've done this thing, we call them bioreactors, and that's a fancy name for a trench filled with wood chips, because wood absorbs nitrogen. Okay, you've probably been told don't put wood chips in your soil in the garden and then put fertilizer on it because you're throwing your money away. So this is a very simple way. It can be low tech. It can be, one of the systems is solar powered. You have to pump the water to get to this upper end and then let it flow through. But then the water that comes out is greatly reduced in its nitrate level. So we have two of these today, one out in Los Osos Valley, another one at Oso Flaco Lake, that we're finding are reducing the amount of nitrate in the water by about 50 to 60%. And it's a passive system other than pumping the water to get there. This is the one out in Los Osos. It's powered by a windmill, pumps up the water and discharges it into this trench filled with wood chips. And so they absorb the nitrogen, and then you'll have bacteria that can break down that nitrogen into other things, or into atmospheric nitrogen and other things that are not harmful in the water. And this is the one down in at Los Osos. That's a solar-powered pump that pumps the water out of, I believe it's actually another little lake called Little Oso Flaco Lake, and treats it and then releases it back down later or lower in the watershed. And these have proven to be good systems where they've been tried, and so these are our two experiments, and I'm hoping we'll be able to do a lot more of these. Another problem is the quality of stormwater runoff. Well, and it's not just within city limits, but through a contract and support from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, we came up with this program, or they did, and we're applying it, what's called the Storm Rewards Program, which is to apply best management practices to lands in residential properties. And the idea there is to try to keep water runoff that comes off of roofs and sidewalks and roadways, get it into some sort of passive treatment before it gets into the creek. Again, this is a pollution control mechanism. And so we've done a number of projects. This was written up a little while ago. I think we've got a few more projects than this now. But basically the idea is to control and to reduce runoff. Get that water to infiltrate into the ground instead of just running off from an impervious surface. For years, the idea has always been, well, let's get rid of that water as soon as we can. Get it off these impervious surfaces, get it into the creeks, and get it out of here. And we now know that has created other problems. And so concepts such as rain gardens, this here where stormwater may come off the roof and goes and sits into a little sunken area where it can absorb and then sink into the groundwater, can be done. People have taken to installation of rain barrels to store rainwater for later use and things like that. And so these are all kind of low technology solutions that can be used to improve the water quality, and that's a public benefit. So it's therefore justified to use public funds to help, because there's a cap on what can be spent on these, but to help a private landowner to finance or to construct a system like this. But the money is being spent, it's public money being spent on private property. But the connection there is, well, water quality is good for everybody. There's a basic question, what's a watershed? And in San Luis Obispo County, we're dealing with that. I guess everybody knows what a watershed is. It's that area where all the water comes down, it falls from the sky, comes down and lands in this area, and it comes down this one ultimate waterway. That's a watershed. Well, that has issues because one watershed is not the same as another watershed. They're different sizes, they have different soils, they have may have different land use histories. There may be issues associated with certain areas, for example, places where there's been high mineral content in the soil, such as the serpentines that we have in many areas around San Luis Obispo that have high metal content or high asbestos content or things like that. So we need to know things about that, and so there are studies being done to develop better information and knowledge of our watersheds. One of our biggest projects, this has been something that has delighted us. We know that it's highly controversial, but this is the problem of the dust emissions from the motor vehicle activity down at the Guadalupe Dunes. We were approached by the State Parks Department to help with revegetation and other activities that were designed to try to trap dust particles and slow what's called saltation. Saltation is the actual movement of dust and sand particles by the wind. And so we're trying to stop or to limit saltation. So that when you get asked outside here, we'll ask you, what's saltation? Now you know. Okay? So we're doing things to help the state park staff to try to do this. Looking at installation of wind fencing, straw bales, strategic placement of those, restoration of vegetation, and trying to see if those things will reduce the movement of sand and the finer materials that can get up into the air. And there's this called the PM10. Those are the very fine particles that are considered the problematic ones. That's the diameter of 10 microns or less. That's very, very fine dust particles, and those are the real problem in Nipomo, Mesa, and elsewhere. And we found that these things have been pretty successful. Here are some of the fencing. It was about 3 miles of fencing was put up, covering about 15 acres, and we found significant reductions in the saltation that occurred out there in those areas. Then they were taken down in the summertime when the winds may be more constant, but they're not as blustery. There is a windy season down in the dunes, and it's actually now. And so there's more fencing being put up to this year. This is for last year. And then also the placement of straw bales. Again, the idea there is to create roughness and cause eddies and things like that will make that will slow down the movement of sand and dust materials. This picture was taken just after they were put in. Some of these bales, the sand would come and scour around here, and we found the bales falling down, getting buried. It was pretty interesting what happened to things. But basically, you could see that they were trapping materials and causing that. And we're going to continue this as long as the state parks folks would like us to do so. There's been a lot of planting. Many acres of native plants have been put out there using about 8 or 10 species, but there's two or three that are the main ones. There's a lupin, a bush lupin, and this looks like I'm going to say like a lavender or a sage or something there. And then the yellow is a mock heather or some other species in the sunflower family that are common invaders. But we've been able to plant these. You do it at the right time of the year, and you just walk away. The sand, there's enough moisture in the sand to allow these plants to stabilize and grow. So we've been very, very pleased with that. We have what's called the Mobile Irrigation Lab, which is a service that's provided. This is a service that is paid for by the county to our engineering staff to go out and help farmers and ranchers be more efficient and effective with their water usage, to cut down on the amount of water usage and hopefully water wastage and discharge of the agricultural tailwaters into the creeks, which is then it's kind of lost to the owner anyway. So it's a water conservation. There's also what's called the alternative review process for agricultural grading. The county some years ago passed an ordinance that regulated agricultural grading, and they've allowed for agriculturalists to come to the Resource Conservation District and work with us on the creation of things like this pond, for roads, farm and ranch roads and things like that. And it's a process that's not as regulatory and has been pretty successful over the years. And we get a fee from the county for doing that. One of the things we do like to do is to honor conservationists at least once a year. And last year, interestingly enough, the conservation, I know you're going to think this is pretty funny, but our conservationists of the year were the local, I forget what the actual name, it was a group of people at PG&E who were working on the replacement of the power lines from San Luis Obispo over to Atascadero. It was a $70 million project, took 2 years to do, and they went through some sensitive habitat, including Reservoir Canyon, which I worked for the city of San Luis Obispo at the time, and I was really worried that they were going to just tear up the place. And they did not. They did it all by helicopter, ferrying people in, ferrying people out, ferrying rock, cement in, ferrying rock out. I was astonished. Ferrying the towers in and placing them. I mean, it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. So we felt that they deserved to be recognized and honored for that, San Bruno notwithstanding. These were our PG&E guys, and so we were very proud to do that. And that's me with John Scholes, who's I guess he's the mayor now in Grover, yeah, and he works for PG&E, and Chris Vardis, who's also works for PG&E, and he's on the city council. That's right. He lost in the last election, but he was on the city council of Pismo. Anyway, so this is a little different story of a small special district and some of the things that we do. And maybe that's why you never heard of us. I don't know. Anyway, so I thank you. I'd be happy to take any questions. In fact, we could take questions for any of the panelists now. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Regarding funding and mission, it sounds as if some of your oversight overlaps with what the county flood control and water conservation agencies do, such as watershed management and conservation, that kind of thing. How do you coordinate with them for the outreach, because they have a large purview as well?
Well, I would say through things like the alternative review process and the projects that we might entertain in watershed management. We will be talking to the people at the county. We've contracted with them for certain work in the both Arroyo Grande Creek and San Luis Obispo Creek, particularly for stormwater management. That means going into the creeks and trying to do a sensitive job of removing materials that might block stormwater, but still trying to protect the habitat for the fish, things like that. And we work closely with the County Public Works Department on things like that. They may do stuff on their own, and we may do stuff on our own, but there is a lot of overlap. And in fact, down in Arroyo Grande, we actually contract with the county to do much of the maintenance work in the lower Arroyo Grande Creek.
Thank you. And then on your financials in your annual report, I noticed the state has a 2/3 share of income. Is that a reflection of your budget, that $2.4 million, or is it something else?
I think I'd have to look at it.
Okay. It indicates a substantial state share. Right.
That state parks grant? Is that the?
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe that's, if it's our income, that a big chunk of our income this year is the state parks contract out at the at the dunes. We also are working on a stormwater detention basin on what's called Tally Ho Creek, which is upstream of Arroyo Grande. That's being funded by the state. But it's, again, that's a service contract. We're buying an easement on a piece of property and then going to build a small detention basin there that will help to alleviate flooding on this Tally Ho Creek, which is kind of a problematic one. So.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much.
I just wanted to thank you for coming and doing this program for us. And we're so glad that it's being taped because it's valuable information for all of us. And just a little word about why we have Girl Scout cookies. It's Women's Health History Month. We thought it was very appropriate. And the League also has an exhibit at the library.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
Thank you very much. Our pleasure.
Okay, folks, that completes the presentation, and I think we're adjourned. So watch for us on Channel 21.
I'm going to go get a Girl Scout cookie already.
Going now.
I'll